Apparently, at the end of the Battle of Britain, British Vice Marshal Alexander Adams was driving to a meeting at his headquarters when he came upon a road sign. The road sign said, "Road closed, unexploded bomb." Adams called over the policeman on duty, hoping he might be able to suggest to him an alternative route. But the policeman said, "Sorry, you can't go through," as he approached the car. The bomb is likely to go off at any minute now. But then he caught sight of Adams' uniform, and he said, "I'm very sorry, sir. I didn't know you were a wing commander. It's quite all right for you to go through." As I read, the person sharing that story said, with friends like that, who needs enemies? There was a big problem with that policeman allowing the vice marshal through the barricade regardless of what uniform he was wearing. The bomb was unexploded regardless of what was written on the vice marshal's uniform, and it was dangerous no matter whatever rank you had. And in the passage we read a few minutes ago, there were three characters, or three sets of characters at least, who each of them in their own way made the same mistake, demonstrated the same problem that policeman demonstrated in that story. And I want you to be listening out as we look at these different characters and see what they had in common with that policeman I spoke about at the beginning. The first character or set of characters is the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the chief priests who put Jesus on trial. The second character is Pontius Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor. And the third set of characters is the crowd, the crowd watching on from outside. And as I said, we're going to look at each of those characters now, and you'll see a pattern in their behavior. Let's look at first at the Pharisees, the chief priests, the religious leaders. Look at verse 28 onwards. It says, "Then they," that's the chief priests, the leaders, "led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover." These religious leaders are very concerned about something. They're very concerned that they don't break the law of their religion. So much so that they won't go into the praetorium, into the palace, if you like, where Pontius Pilate resided. They didn't want to go in there in case, as it says in verse 28, in case they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Among the stricter Jews of this time, they were very particular about keeping clean for the religious festivals. And especially those in positions of authority like these chief priests, like the Pharisees, they were very careful to try and avoid any appearance of uncleanness, lest it would mean they would not be able to eat the Passover. And to enter into the accommodation, the palace of the most famous Gentile in the region, in Jerusalem, could easily have caused scandal. And so they say, we won't go in. We won't step into the praetorium. And actually Pontius Pilate has to come out to them, as you see in verse 29. But not only that, did you notice verse 31? Pilate asked them what Jesus has done wrong, that they should put him on trial and bring Jesus to him, Pontius Pilate. And they say slightly cryptically in verse 30, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Trust us, he's bad. If he wasn't bad, we wouldn't have brought him to you. And look what Pilate says in verse 31. He says, you take him and judge him according to your law. Pilate says, what's this got to do with me? If he's done something wrong for you, you deal with it amongst yourselves. But then listen to what they say in verse 31. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. So not only are these religious leaders very concerned about the laws of their religion, but they're also, it seems, very concerned about the laws of the land. They say, we can't put him to death. He deserves death, but we haven't got the authority to put him to death, but you do. And because it seems they're so concerned to keep that law and to not take the law into their own hands, they brought him to Pontius Pilate. So that's the first set of characters, the Jewish leaders who are very concerned about their laws of their religion and the laws of the land, and that is why they're bringing Jesus to Pontius Pilate. Keep that in your minds. But let's move on to the second character. We see Pontius Pilate, and we read what he does next in verse 33. It says, then Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Now, why does Pontius Pilate ask this? Why is Pontius Pilate eager to know whether Jesus is the king of the Jews? That's the claim the Jewish leaders have come to him with. They said, he claims to be the king of the Jews. Now, is Pilate interested? Is Pilate interested that maybe Jesus is an important figure who he needs to show proper deference to? Well, I can tell you that's not what Pilate is interested in. What Pilate is interested in is whether Jesus is claiming to be a king as a rival to him, or perhaps even to Caesar himself. What Pilate is worried about is his political position. Pilate was put there as governor to keep order. The last thing he wants is a riot. The last thing he wants is an uprising against Rome. And so he's very keen to find out whether Jesus is pushing to be a ringleader of some sort of revolt. He doesn't really believe Jesus is a king. He doesn't really believe that Jesus is who he says he is. All he's interested in is, if Jesus is claiming to be a king, then this could lead to unrest, and this could lead to a riot among the people. And if Caesar hears of this, Pontius Pilate's neck might be on the block, as it were. If not his actual life, at least his career as a politician and as governor of Judea. That's what Pilate is concerned about. That is what Pilate is speaking to Jesus about. Nothing else is motivating him. So he is concerned about his political credibility and his power and how that may be taken from him. He's concerned what this trial will mean and what the outcome of it will be for him. So that's the second character, Pontius Pilate. So we've had the chief priests, we've had Pontius Pilate, but there's a third set of characters as well, and we read about them at the end of the passage. We read in verse 38, Pilate said to Jesus, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Then they all cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber. The crowds pipe up at this point, and from other Gospels it's clear this isn't just the chief priests, although they're there. This is the whole crowd of people who are gathering to see what is happening because they've heard that Jesus of Nazareth, the great prophet, is on trial. And they're all gathering to see what will happen. And Pilate comes out and he says, I find no fault in Jesus. He's not a ringleader. He's not interested in setting up his own kingdom. We'll see that in a few minutes when we look at Jesus' words. But Jesus isn't a political threat. Pilate can't find anything wrong with Jesus. This seems to be just some petty squabble from the chief priests. But in trying to placate the situation, he says to this crowd, which is growing and getting larger and getting more, showing more unrest, he says to them, at this time of year, it's my custom to release a prisoner to you. So I'll give you a choice. I can release to you Jesus, who I can find nothing wrong with, or I can release to you Barabbas. And John tells us here, Barabbas was a robber. And Pilate hopes that they're going to say, oh, release Jesus to us. We don't want Barabbas. We don't want the robber. We don't want the criminal. We would rather have Jesus than him. But what do they say? They say, not this man, but Barabbas. The crowd has been worked up into such a frenzy that they're willing to choose a thief and a robber over Jesus. They have been so stirred up and so twisted by the false narratives of the religious leaders that they say we want a criminal more than we want the innocent Jesus. That's the third set of characters, the crowd. Have you seen yet what these all have in common? And what these all have in common with the policeman I mentioned at the beginning? With the first group, we see that they're very concerned about religious observance. With Pontius Pilate, we see he's very concerned about political necessity, preserving his position. And we see the insanity of the crowd as they choose a criminal over Jesus. What do they all have in common? All of them have sacrificed truth for their own benefit, for their own particular desires and interests. The religious leaders have long ago sacrificed truth on the altar of their own envy and their own jealousy of Jesus. You know, it's funny really when you look in more detail the stark hypocrisy of these religious leaders. They show such concern not to be defiled because they want to have the Passover, and they don't want to take the law into their own hands, but already they've broken a variety of their own laws. Trials were not supposed to take place at night or on the eve of an important festival, but both those things were true of Jesus' trial. The death penalty could not be passed if a person was found guilty at night. They would have to wait to pass sentence. All trials apparently were supposed to take place in a special place, but that did not happen here. And 2 or 3 witnesses were needed, and those witnesses needed to agree in order for a death penalty to be given. And we've already read, perhaps not in John's gospel, but in other gospels, it says that the religious leaders brought forth false witnesses, but they couldn't get their testimony to agree. So even up to this point, they've been showing a willingness to bend the rules for their own benefit, and they're doing the same here. But of course, the bigger problem is that they're so concerned, apparently, to keep their religious ritual and so concerned to keep the laws of the land, even as they murder the Son of God, as they put to death their Messiah. Jesus talked about straining out gnats and swallowing camels. Well, this is the biggest one. So concerned about religious ritual and the laws of the land, and yet they're willing to murder an innocent man, and not just an innocent man, but the Prince of Life himself. You see how they've completely lost sight of truth. So eaten up are they by their own envy, their own jealousy, and their own self-interest. But Pontius Pilate isn't much better. Pontius Pilate is the same, although perhaps with slightly different motivations. He doesn't hate Jesus. He doesn't want Jesus to die. But he comes to see that Jesus must die if he's to keep his position. He desperately tries all sorts of political machinations to prevent that. But all the while, his main concern is keeping his authority, keeping his power. When he offers Barabbas or Jesus, he's not really concerned about Jesus. All he wants to do is find some way he can appease the crowd and yet release Jesus as well. He's not really concerned with truth either. If he was, he would release Jesus and suffer the consequences. But he's not willing to do that. He has to preserve his authority at all costs. So he's not really all that different to the Jewish leaders. He too has sacrificed truth for his own interests. But thirdly, what about the crowd? Well, again, you see it perhaps most clearly and most insanely in them. They've been whipped up into this frenzy, and they're given this choice between Jesus or Barabbas. Which one do you want? And they choose Barabbas. They choose the criminal. You know, many people say, don't they, that the crowd can't be wrong, or the majority can't be wrong. Well, sadly, the majority often is wrong. Often crowds are not the wisest thing to follow. The judgment of a crowd, of a mob, is often mistaken, to put it mildly. And so we see here this crowd choosing a robber and again sacrificing the truth. The one, remember, who they had welcomed into Jerusalem just a few days previously with palm branches saying, Hosanna, Hosanna to him who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna to the Son of David. They've been willing to forget all of that in this moment of madness. And they sacrifice truth to satisfy their own insanity. Do you see how all of them have the same problem? Similar again to that policeman at the beginning. He knew the bomb was dangerous. He knew that anyone, regardless of their rank, could be killed if they crossed that line. But he allowed his concern for the rank of that officer to cloud his judgment. And the same can be true for any of us. We might laugh at that policeman. We might shake our heads at the chief priests and Pontius Pilate and the crowd. But the truth is, it's all too easy for us too to sacrifice truth on the altar of our own desires. It's very easy to walk through life making decisions based on what is best for us or what seems best for us, and not on what is actually true and what is actually right. We're as susceptible to peer pressure as this crowd was. We're as susceptible to the lure of career and of status as Pilate was. We are as susceptible to jealousy and envy as those chief priests were. And who of us can say that we haven't at times chosen the course which suited us best, even though it meant sacrificing truth? Well, perhaps it shouldn't surprise us that when Pontius Pilate is given the privilege of speaking face to face with Jesus, that's exactly what Jesus addresses with him. This very issue, the issue of truth. Look at verse 37. Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Jesus stands before Pontius Pilate and he says, "I'm above your petty concerns. I'm above the accusation of these Jewish leaders. I've come for one purpose only, to testify to the truth, to do what my Father has told me to do. And anyone who is of the truth will listen to me." And as he says that, he condemns all these other people. He condemns the religious leaders who are trying to kill him. He ultimately condemns Pilate, who sends him off to be crucified rather than releasing him and suffering the consequences. He condemns the crowd who say, "We want Barabbas and not Jesus." In all these ways, they show that they're not willing to hear the voice of Christ. They are not of the truth. They are of lies. They are interested in their own desires and not in the interests of Christ and not in the interests of God. Because God is interested in truth, and Jesus is the truth. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Did you notice what Jesus said in verse 36? This is when Pilate's grilling him about whether he's a king and exactly what is his purpose here. What is he trying to do? Is he trying to cause a riot? What is he trying to do? Well, look at verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Jesus isn't concerned about preserving his own life. He's not concerned with preserving his own earthly kingdom. He's not concerned about his own earthly wealth. He's not concerned about his own earthly comfort. All those things are inconsequential to his mission, the mission that his Father has given to him. And he says, everyone who is similarly of the truth will know who he is. That is, in fact, the message of this whole Gospel of John. You could say this is what the whole Gospel of John is about. It's Jesus walking through this world, seeing who is of the truth and who will receive him, and who is of lies and who will reject him. And he says, "I've come for those who are of the truth." Did you notice he even shows an interest in determining which Pilate is? Did you see that in verse 34? In verse 33, Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And in verse 34, Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate's showing an interest. He's showing an interest in Jesus being the king of the Jews. And Jesus asks him, "Are you asking this for yourself? Do you want to know this because you are interested as an individual yourself, or have you got other interests? Is something else motivating you?" Sadly, the following conversation demonstrates that Pilate has got other interests. You can see that in his dismissive words in verse 38. What is truth? What is truth, even as truth stood in front of him? But even here, Jesus is seeking that which is lost. He's looking to see, is Pilate of the truth? Is Pilate interested in doing what is right and good? Is he willing to receive Christ, or will he reject him like the others round about? And Jesus asks us the same question. Daily, he asks us the same question. He says that same statement that he said to Pontius Pilate, he says to us, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And that statement reaches deep down into the hearts of all of us. What is motivating you in this world? When you get up tomorrow morning and you go to work, or you do your business around your home, or you meet with your neighbours, you meet with your friends, you meet with your family, what is motivating you? Is it a concern for truth and for Christ and for his kingdom? Or is it a concern for you and your kingdom and your interests? Because if it is, when the moment of testing comes, you will not stand firm, you will crumble, as Peter did. Jesus daily encourages us, exhorts us, cling to me, cling to the truth. Don't follow your own self-interest. Don't live for this world. Don't live for the kingdoms of this world. Don't live for your own personal kingdom. It said, listen to him. Listen to his words. Hear his voice. And you will discover a kingdom which cannot be destroyed. You will become part of a kingdom which will never vanish away. If you live for yourself, if you, like those chief priests, or like Pontius Pilate, or like this crowd, if you live simply by the whim of your own desires and your own instincts, your kingdom will crumble in the end. I'm sorry to break it to you, but that is the truth. Nothing we can make in this world with our own strength will last the test of the judgment day. It will all be burnt up in the end. That's why Jesus told the parable of the wise and foolish man. Who was the foolish man? The foolish man was the man who built on the sand. And that was the person who heard Jesus' words, but did not do them, did not take heed of them, and went their own way. And Jesus says, great was the fall of that house. But who was the wise man? The wise man was the man who listened to Christ, who heard his word, who received Christ and built their life on him. And when the storm came, his house stood firm. This trial of Jesus is a case study in the danger of refusing to heed Christ, a case study in the danger of refusing the truth in our lives. Wonderfully, however, Christ did not fail in his own test. Christ did not crumble in the face of the Pharisees or the Pontius Pilate or the crowd. He stayed true. He stayed firm. He stayed committed to the will of his Father. And as a result, all of us, any of us who want to, can be saved today. None of us need to continue to cling to our own lives. We don't need to cling to our own wisdom. We don't need to cling to our own understanding. We can entrust our lives into the loving hands of Christ, who is much more able to guard it and guide it than we ourselves are. As I say, we'll be continuing in John's Gospel in the new year, but perhaps that's not a bad place to end for the year before we come to the crucifixion itself. A challenge to think, who are we building on? What are we building on? Our own interests? Building for our own kingdom? Or are we listening to him who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life? And with those thoughts in mind, I've chosen as our final hymn a hymn which directs our gaze to Christ on who he is and what he has done. It's number 192. Who is he in yonder stall, at whose feet the shepherds fall? 'Tis the Lord, O wondrous story, 'tis the Lord, the King of glory. At his feet we humbly fall, crown him, Lord of all. Let's stand to sing number 192.